Hello and welcome to the very first video here on All Things DIY. And with that, welcome to the workshop. It might not be the biggest nor the tidiest, but it is well enough equipped so that we can build a good few things. So let's start this video series with building a little storage box for my audio recorder here. It came without any protective casing, so this is a good, simple and very useful little project. So I would suggest let's get to work. Now, the box that we're going to be building today is as simple as boxes get. It's just going to be a normal rectangular box, opens in the middle, has two hinges here, and can secure the audio recorder. Only problem here is that the audio recorder is actually currently recording the audio, so it is connected to the microphone. And the cable is by far long enough that I could just throw it out the window without it disconnecting, but it still makes things a little awkward. But first things first, let's measure this thing so that we know the rough size of our box. Now, the box is going to have some form of padding in it to protect it from any bumps or anything. So that's going to need some space. Give it 2 centimeters either side. That makes plus 4 centimeters in total. And the height, well, I don't think we need 2 centimeters. Let's give it 1 centimeter. Now, when you're coming up with the measurements for the pieces of wood that are needed, it's of course important not to forget the thickness of the material that you're actually using. This is some leftover 6mm birch plywood. It is a little bent, as plywood tends to be, but that's not too bad. The box is going to be fairly small, so it's not going to be that noticeable, and we're going to clamp it really well, so that'll hopefully pull it straight. Anyhow, I have made a little list of all of the little pieces of wood that we need to cut, so let's get over to the table saw. Now wait a second, before we start cutting wood like crazy people here, it makes sense to think about where and how to cut the wood. Looking at my measurements, I see that I have 4 pieces that need to be 19.2 centimeters in length. So it makes sense to set the fence at 19.2 centimeters once, cut all of those dimensions, and do the same thing with all of the other reoccurring dimensions. So, the fence is set, ready to cut. One good idea is to put on some PPE, because you never know what that thing is going to throw at your face, and it makes a hell of a noise, so some ear protection is a very good idea as well. So here we are. We cut all of our pieces. We have top and the bottom, the 2 long sides, Let's turn that around, that looks better. And the two short sides. So now before we glue this thing together, it's a good idea to kind of pre-assemble it to see if everything actually fits, because, well, they always say measure twice, cut once, but for some reason in real life it happens the other way around much more often. So let's just see if that actually makes somewhat usable box. That doesn't look half bad. Now the big question is, were the measurements actually correct? But that fits in there quite nicely. Still enough space around it for the padding. So now we can basically glue it together. Well, normally I would sand the inside of the box pieces now, because it's a lot easier to sand a flat piece of wood than to sand inside of a box. But since we're gonna be putting padding in it anyway, there's no real need to do that. So let's glue this thing up. For gluing, well, there's not going to be any advanced joinery happening here. We're just going to go wood glue all the way, because that is plenty strong enough for this use case here. Okay, now let's see how we're going to do this. That's always a bit of an odd situation here with clamping all of those bits at once, but we'll do our best. Make sure that the inside of this piece here is the one with the ugly bit on it. Time for some clamps. These are massive overkill, but they have two nice and flat areas here, so they work quite well for that sort of thing. Let's set two of them up for the box to sit in like so. Gluing these boxes is always a little awkward. There we go! One big clamped up box. Now the only thing we can do is wait overnight till the glue dries and then check on the result tomorrow. Oh, and it is always a good idea to try and get rid of some of the excess glue before it dries, because that is going to harden and is then quite annoying to get off. So get as much off now as you can, and also make sure that your clamps don't stick to your piece of wood. There we go. Now we can wait till tomorrow. There we are. The glue has dried, it's all nice and solid now. Next step is to sand the whole thing. Unfortunately, it's Sunday now, and in Germany you're not supposed to make a lot of noise on a Sunday, and the disc sander over there, together with the shop vac, they are quite loud, so I can't use those today. I mean, I could hand sand the whole thing, but it's just more fun with the disc sander. So I'm going to have to wait another night. Luckily for you, that's only going to take around 3 seconds. Hooray, it's Monday! Not a sentence one says very often, but this means that we can use all of the power tools to our heart's content. And as you can see, I'm back in the black t-shirt, so that means work can commence. Let's get this box out of those clamps. That doesn't look too bad. There are a few edges we need to sand down a bit to make it nice and smooth. There is still some glue residue left, which makes the surface a bit uneven. But I'd suggest let's get over to the hand sander. To the disc sander, of course. But before we start sanding, there's one other very important point I would like to address first. And that is, you might have noticed that we've created a completely enclosed box here. There is no way of getting the audio recorder in it. But we've done that on purpose. We'll just chop off the lid later on the table saw. And with that we can ensure that the lid and the bottom piece fit together perfectly. Now, this disc sander really needs a new disc, but it'll do for now. That'll do. So everything is nice and smooth now. You can't feel the joints between the separate pieces of wood, and the edges are looking nice and crisp, which looks cool, but is a bit impractical because that actually hurts. So I'm going to round those over a bit. All the edges are nice and smooth now, and the next step is to chop off the lid. Before I do that, I'll just mark one side here with a pencil so that I can easily identify which side goes where once I cut the top off. Why is it not working? Which plug have I forgotten? This one here. Let's try that again. Now that we have a box that can actually open, it's time to think about the finish. There are two options here. I could either stain the box or I could paint the box. And I think audio equipment suits a black box, so I'm going to paint it. Although, wait a second. Before we paint it, let's engrave the Tascam logo to the top of the lid so that the box is easily identifiable later. Now it isn't looking that fantastic, and it doesn't look like it's in the middle, even though it is. It's just the T looks a lot narrower than the M, but oh well. We'll give it a go anyway. Well, not the prettiest, but at least you can read it. At least I hope it stands out a bit more once I paint the box black, which is now actually the next step. I went ahead and attached some feet to them with some double-sided tape so they're easy to handle and the paint can dry without the box touching anything else. I've applied 2 coats of paint and sanded in between so that the finish is nice and smooth, only to find out that I don't really like the way this Tascam logo looks. The letters are just too narrow and you can't read it well enough. So I'm going to attack it again with the Dremel tool, only this time with a much bigger bit. That should do 2 things. First of all, it's going to make the lines a lot wider, and secondly, obviously, it's going to take the paint off. So there's bare wood underneath, which would make the name a lot more legible. Now this can do one of 2 ways. Either it can look good, or it can look absolutely terrible. I obviously hope for the first, but wish me luck. Now it turned out the third option that I hadn't mentioned before, which is meh. It's not absolutely terrible, but it's also not great. But if you want precise results, I would suggest not attaching an action cam to your Dremel tool. That just makes the whole thing handle a little strangely. I didn't like it, so I painted it over again, trying to hide the rough edges of the letters. So that needs to dry now. Now since that is out of the way, we can focus our attention towards the padding. I got this foam here which should do the trick, and I've already cut out a piece that fits in the box quite nicely, like so. The only problem is that this foam is twice as thick as it needs to be, so I'm going to have to cut that in half. And for that, I have prepared a 1 centimeter tall piece of wood, which I'm going to use to guide the blade of the knife. Let's give this a go. And there we are, 2 roughly same pieces of foam. Well, one is a bit thicker than the other, but that's okay, nobody will notice. If we just put them ugly side downwards in the box, well, that should work. Now next thing is to make the surroundings for when the audio recorder is actually sitting in it. There we are. This was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. The edges are not the nicest. and there are still some trace lines visible, which I can't do anything about now. I thought about gluing it sort of upside down onto the piece of foam so that the clean side is at the top, but unfortunately those edges are even worse than the ones on the top from where I cut, so I'll just have to deal with some black lines around the outside of this. If the audio recorder is sitting in it, they're not really visible because the audio recorder is black as well. So I think I'll just glue it on like this. Now I'm going to be using some spray-on adhesive here, which is also made for foam and styrofoam, so that should work. But before that we need to get rid of everything here because spray-on glue is really annoying if it gets anywhere, and it gets everywhere. Now make sure that I spray it on actually the right side and then stick it to the right piece of foam, which is the thinner one, this one here. Now let's see how that goes. All right, now while this is drying, oh that is sticky, we can think about the hinges for this box. The hinges that I've bought for this box are these silver ones here. I think they suit the size of the box rather nicely, and they are going to be attached with some tiny M3 screws. Now in order to find the perfect placement for the hinges, let's first make sure that the lid is on the right way around, like so. Make sure it's nice and square. And now we're going to clamp it in position, making sure that we still have access to the side where we actually want the hinges. So now we can place them where we want them. And I think 2.5 centimeters off the sides is a good placement for them, like so. And now we can poke some holes in the wood where we need to drill the actual holes for the screws to go. Trying to get the middle of the hole in the hinge so that it doesn't get wonky once the screw is in. So, now that we know where we need to drill the holes, let's get over to the drill press. But before we drill the actual holes for the screws, let's pre-drill those holes so that it is easier for the 3mm drill bit to find the place where it needs to go. Now with the holes drilled, it's time to test fit, see if they are actually in the right place. Let's just set the hinges here and stick the screws through. Hopefully there are no nasty surprises here. First one looks okay. That hole is a bit off, but still works. Which means it is now time for my least favorite step, and that is cutting the screws to length. Normally I would attach the screws with a washer and a nut. Unfortunately, the only washers that I have are too big, so it's only going to be the nut this time. That's not a problem, the forces on the hinges aren't that big. Now let's see if that works. The nuts for these need a 5mm spanner, and unfortunately I don't have one, so I'm going to use these pliers here, which should do the trick. Now let's give this a go. And there we are. We have a box with some hinges, but since I wanted to make sure that I didn't cut the screws too short, I left them a little bit too long. So I'm going to try to trim those down with the Dremel tool and a cut-off disc. Now, in this case, eye protection is even more important than usually because these things like to disintegrate, and that's not good. That looks better. Time to glue the foam in the box. I have notched some very ugly holes in the side here for where the nuts of the hinges are, so that there's a better fit. There is one more thing to do before the box is done, and that is attaching the clasps. I got these here. They're a little too big for the box, but they were the only silver ones that I could find that matched the hinges. Now, they are supposed to be attached with some teeny tiny little nails, and since I am absolutely rubbish at hammering nails in, I decided to glue them on using some 2-component glue. Now, that is not ideal, but I hope it's going to work. In order to prepare the box for the gluing, I put some tape in between the top and the bottom, so that if glue spills out and goes in between, I can just peel the tape off and it doesn't glue the box shut. I have also marked the position where the clasps are supposed to go, so that I can set them quickly in the right place. This 2-component glue needs to be mixed well, and then you have 5 minutes to apply it before it starts to harden, and it's supposed to be dry after 20 minutes. Well, that was a mess. I hope that works. We'll see that once it's dry. And of course I got some glue on the box. I tried to wipe it off. It's probably going to leave a not so nice residue there, but let's see how it turns out. It looks like the clasps stayed put, so that is good. The big question is just, can I open the box? And I cannot. Well, let's find where that glue went. There we are. Wasn't that hard. box is officially done. I put the clasps on this way around because the lid is not as tall as the bottom, and this part of the hinge is a lot longer than this. So it looked a bit strange with them turned upside down with this dome bit here so close to the edge. I think these are normally attached the other way around, but they still serve the same function. First project done. I now have a safe place to keep my audio recorder. I hope you liked it. Leave a like if you did. Oh, and one more thing. Should you be interested in automotive or technical content, go check out my other channel called All Things Technical. Anyhow, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.